So, 8.5 meta update. It's basically OP08 tier list adjusted to the new starter decks release. And this is what we will focus on today. Starting off with S tier. In this tier we put meta defining decks. To succeed you need to either play these leaders or have a good plan how to play against them. First leader in S tier, Blue Don Quixote do Flamingo. Out of nowhere this deck received amazing support in starter deck 17. The best aggro deck to play in 8.5. However, that's not all. With the current card pool and flexible leaders effect, this deck can be built in many different ways depending on expected matchups. You can play aggro, midrange or even control version of this deck based on your preference. Doffy builds are still evolving even in OP09 in Asia. Most recent additions are Teach and Jozu, which add a layer of new lines and complexity to the deck. If you played red purple low, this deck should be natural transition for you to take over the meta in 8.5 and even OP09. But it's not the only deck in S tier. I think 8.5 meta will contain two S tier decks, and the second one being Black Yellow Luffy. It's already the best deck in OP08 format and 8.5 doesn't change much. Big advantage of this leader is consistency and access to disgusting Gecko Moria turn. On top of that, you are quite flexible with tech cards in this deck depending on expected matchups. In 8.5 I expect ASL to be back in BY Luffy builds. Ace deserves to be back with his brothers, especially in the meta of all blue. So, to put it simply, if you are a very competitive person, you probably want to play one of these two decks or cook something that can challenge them. Moving on to A tier. In this tier I put decks that I think have a fair fight with our top dogs and are still a league ahead of other leaders. Starting off with another upgraded deck, Purple Luffy, also known as Perfect Curve Purple PCP. Even though we need to wait until OP09 to witness the full power of this leader, I think Western Scene will cook some spicy list for the upcoming events in 8.5. There is already a debate if Luffy Tarot package is strong enough to be included, or should we still stick to trusted deck Skeleton and just put in couple of new cards to counter the meta. However, one thing we can be certain: with the release of new starter decks, purple color received one of the most disgusting 2k counters to fight black decks, in particular, Uso Hachi. You can aggro your opponent and then put his blocker Sabo to sleep and push for the game. The biggest advantage of this deck is having a good chance versus Blue Doffy and BY Luffy. But why it's not in the S tier then? Because you are very dice dependent. Deck is much better going first due to the build and leader's effect. So if you can guarantee always going first, we can put Purple Luffy in S tier, but until then we need to have a good plan when we lose a dice. Second A tier deck is Black Lucci. This leader is a nightmare. Relatively easy to pick up, one of the strongest Moria turns and a lot of tech choices depending on a meta call. Even after any sloppy ban, deck is still relevant. The only downside, and why I didn't put it in the S tier, is that you need to adjust your build depending on what you expect to face the most. And if we put Doffy and Luffy in the S tier, it's not so easy for Lucci to cover both of these matchups. Nonetheless, Lucci is miles ahead over other decks in the game, and it seems he will stay on top. Moving on to B tier. Here I put the decks that I expect to see in top cut, but probably are not gonna win the regionals. Starting off with upgraded Black Smoker. This is very interesting leader and I have high hopes for him. You can run the usual Black Exodia package, Brenu into Borsalino, into Sakazuki, into Moria. But on top of that you have two new cards custom made for this leader. Amazing card advantage and rush preparation for Moria turn via Sengoku, and amazing 5-drop Tashigi that should counter any black deck due to trash effect instead of KO. And as we can see, we have quite a few black decks on top, so if you are lucky enough in the Swiss, you should be able to achieve the top cut with this leader. Second leader I have in B tier is Purple Yellow Pudding, so-called BY Luffy Worst Nightmare. But now we also received some good upgrade versus black decks. Let me explain. Pudding is a leader with a simple plan. Ramp, play Big Mom turn earlier than normal and win. Due to such simple game plan, we can afford to be really flexible with 2k counters in a deck. In category starter deck we received a very strong 2k counter Brûlé that help us to mess with our opponent's life cards. On top of that, in Purple Luffy starter deck we received Uso Hachi, which which will help us a lot in black matchups to rest the blockers and go for lethal with big mums. The only issue is that pudding is very weak to any aggro strategies like blue Doffy and purple Luffy, but as long as you expect to face BY Luffy and black Lucci, you should be able to achieve top cut. Next B tier deck is blue Boa Hancock. Like I said in my OP8 tier list, once starter decks are released, we need to swap Boa and Doffy places in the tier list. Deck is still strong and the game plan is the same, but you need to do the right meta call. To put it simply, if you expect to face BY Luffy and purple Luffy, play Boa Hancock. However, if you expect to fight Doffy and Lucci all day long, it might be better to choose something else. Next deck in B tier is green Bonnie. In my opinion, Bonnie is still the strongest green leader in the game. However, with the rise of blue Doffy, only the most dedicated players will manage to achieve top cut if any. And don't get me wrong, you still have an amazing matchup into BY Luffy, which will most likely cut most of the tech cards now. Also, purple Luffy matchup should not be a problem. However, your biggest nightmares are blue Doffy and black Lucci. So depending on your meta call, it might be better to practice different leader. The last two decks in B tier I call gatekeepers. I always mention them around B tier because they are a checkpoint for any new or competitive aspiring players. Yellow NL and blue Nami. Depending on how much participation percentage Doffy will be, we might see the return of the NL, the prime deck to counter any aggro strategies. However, I still think that skilled Doffy player should have no bigger problems with this matchup. But when the leader is popular, not every player is a pro, so you should be able to farm average Doffy player. The same goes for Nami. Even though we recently saw some success in OP8 meta, 8.5 should be much faster. Decks like blue Doffy and purple Luffy should make sure that Nami is kicked out of the meta, but surprises might happen, especially that we expect BY Luffy and black Lucci to still be popular. Because of that, if you are preparing for regionals or any competitive play, don't dodge NL or Nami matchup. Invest time to learn the matchups properly and avoid any unnecessary losses during the tournament. Moving on to C tier. In this tier I put leaders that I expect to see during the tournaments, however it will take much more effort and cooking to achieve top results with them than the other mentioned ones before. Here we have black Luffy, red blue Marco, green Uta, yellow Katakuri, Reiju and Zoro. I think there is a really small group of people that have an idea how to play black Luffy properly and have results with it. Especially now with the upgrade to Smoker, I think it's more beneficial to focus on other black decks than trying to cook black Luffy. Main weakness of the deck is removing only one target from the board, which won't be enough versus decks like blue Doffy. Red blue Marco received a lot of support from Whitebeard starter deck. However, I think that this deck might be a bait. Yes, you can take some players by surprise, but you are still 4 life leader and experienced player can take advantage out of it. However, I strongly believe that someone in the West will crack this leader, and we will see at least one in top cut in the upcoming 8.5 events. Next is green Uta. I understand that we received a lot of upgrades for this leader, but I think they are still not good enough. Like Marco, I hope someone can make a good result with her. But why should I play Uta when Bonnie is just a superior green leader? Moving on to yellow Katakuri. Small upgrades from starter deck, however I still think that this is the best beginner deck in the game. If you know anyone that want to get into the game, build him a Katakuri deck. It will teach him good fundamentals and playing around win condition, but also can help to mitigate some mistakes via triggers. I don't expect much from the deck, but I think it should be possible to have at least one in top cut. And the last two aggro decks, Reiju and Zoro. Don't get me wrong, I still think they are good decks, however had to move them to C tier simply because Doffy is just that much better aggro deck than them. We will probably sometimes see them in top cut, but I will be very surprised if I see Reiju or Zoro winning a regional level event. So in summary, this is short update to the tier list, mainly with upgraded decks from the starter decks release and already strong decks in the meta. I don't see much value in listing all the other leaders as they won't be that much relevant in tournament play if you focus on being the best. However, now is the time for you. Let me know in the comments below if I missed any deck that you think can top cut or even win a tournament in 8.5 meta. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Bye bye.